Fabulous.
All
Hey,
right.
everybody. This is Jackie Luqman.
And I'm Abdushahi Luqman.
And welcome to our regular episode, our regular edition of Live and Coffee Current Events and Politics in Luqman Nation. And we apologize for being a little late. Technical issues, as always. But it's worth it because tonight we are really, really honored to have as a guest someone who we have been really admiring his work for a minute. And he's been like the lone voice, one of the few lone voices crying out in the wilderness on behalf of black men. Honestly, a group of people who, and I say this as a black woman, who have really been crapped on quite a bit in American society and even among black people. And the truth about the particular and unique oppression of black men has really not been focused enough on in American society. And we're really thankful that Dr. Tommy Curry has joined us tonight. And he's not only given us an amazing book that chronicles this history of oppression, but his work before the book came out has been just a wellspring of great information to help us get through this ridiculous 400 years of misinformation that we're still dealing with. So, ladies and gentlemen,
but we always say, because one of our taglines is we're the most dangerous show on the internet.
True.
Dr. Curry being on here tonight shows why we're the most dangerous show on the internet.
We think so.
We may lose. We may lose some friends, but but we'll see.
So, thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Curry. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well.
So, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Alabama.
Alabama. Ooh, that's in the belly of the beast down there. So
I'm from the South, so
yeah, you are from the South. So let me give people who don't know who Dr. Tommy Curry is a little bit of background. Dr. Curry was raised in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Now that's Lake important. Yeah. It's important where you were raised in regard to your views on gun ownership for black people, and your very interesting, it's not interesting to us because we understand it, but a very interesting viewpoint that got you in a little bit of a controversy a few years ago in regard to the possibility of black people viewing violent resistance to racism, particularly in that context. So explain how growing up in Lake Charles, Louisiana shaped your views on those issues.
Well, I was born in '79, which was the end of segregation in my city. So I grew up still seeing color-only signs and fountains, things like that, bathrooms downtown. It impressed upon me, even growing up, that there was a clear difference between black and white. And I remember, when I was young, my father would tell me that one of the reasons that he kept a shotgun near the door is to protect us in case white people ever tried to run into the house, attack us, and take things that we had. This was a fear that my father had growing up in Jonesboro, Louisiana. And it was something that I think most black people in the 1980s, early 90s shared in Lake Charles, given its racial history and given the way that the city was divided. So in 2000 and I guess last year, a white supremacist, I think his name was Rod Dreher, heard a piece of a radio broadcast, a podcast I did for Reading News Review, talking about Django Unchained. And one of the things I said in Django is that while I can appreciate the cinematic universe that was created by Tarantino, one of the things that I thought was so worrying was that it didn't contextualize black violence throughout history. So Django emerges as a kind of superhero, right? He's killing all the white people that are enslaving black people to save his wife. And we get caught up in that narrative. But we don't look at how many black people, black men especially, but black people generally died in slave revolts, in militant resistance, and how even armed militant resistance, like with the Deacons of Defense or the Black Armed Guard, were integral to the success of the Black Civil Rights Movement of the 60s and 70s. They're completely erased from history. So I made a comment, which was taken out of context, that said that if you look at the traditions of armed resistance, there are Black revolutionaries who fundamentally believe that the only way that Black people could be free is if some white people died. And the effect of that was this white supremacist saying I was calling for the deaths of white people, which I didn't do, but nonetheless, a white supremacist, any Black person defending themselves from my violence or against white people is a call for violent revolt in the killing of white people. So I think that some nuance is needed, because when we look at the history of what Black people have done, when we look at the history of the Black Armed Guard, we look at even at the history of the Black Panther Party, you see Black men willing to give their lives for children and women so that the political goals, the aspirations, could live to the next generation. And I think that we do a great dishonor and disservice to our own history as well as to people who died for us if we don't remember that while it's politically acceptable to pretend that white people came down from the mountains and saved Black people, that Black people actually fought for their own liberation. And that's something that I teach in my classes, that, you know, we're given a history that suggests it was white abolitionists, it was white suffragists, that it was white liberals, white radicals that energized Black people, and we don't give Black people historical agency, where Black people had their own ideas, had their own organizations, had their own evaluations of life and death, and that motivated political action in the United States and abroad.
Well, you know, it reminded me of a story that Malcolm X, also known as Malik El-Haj Malik Shabazz, said when he was accused of the same thing, of inciting violence against white people. And he said he was on the plane, and a white woman passenger had said something to him about it. Said, "Oh, you're that Malcolm X who wants to kill all white people." And he said, when he was relating the story, he said, "Yeah," he said, "but that's assuming that all white people can be killed." You know, so there's this whole thing of what you're saying is, as far as when we advocate for our own armed defense, it's always taken to that extreme, and especially when a white supremacist who probably holds the same views of getting rid of us, you know, through violent means, you know, want to make an issue out of this. So
and
well, you know,
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say, I was like, the irony of it is that it's a white supremacist. Like, what white supremacist is ever happy with anything that Black people do for their own progress?
Nothing.
I mean, it's not like, you know, some white liberal who was nonviolent was so upset that Curry said that the history of Black civil rights included violence and he was trying to bring this back. It's
right.
White supremacists. Like, I mean, what's the section of white supremacists that like Black people that we don't know about?
Exactly.
You know, it's nonsensical. It's nonsensical, and I think that the reaction that the public and the university had to it is really an indication that white supremacy is now considered to be a moderate political platform in the United States. That it's very easy to construe a Black man, and the irony is that I write about self-defense much more than I do revolutionary violence. That even talking about armed self-defense historically brings about the kinds of responses where people say that it's okay to kill me and my family and my children. So that's the world that we live in. That's one of the perils of being a Black man, especially a Black male academic. And that's not to ignore that, you know, sisters have been attacked as well. But I think that the way that Black men are framed, that the kinds of things that they've said about killing me, killing my family, accusing me of being a rapist, right? Saying they were going to lynch me, that they were going to castrate me. Those kinds of threats are a very particular form of violence that Black men have historically experienced. That white people, as much as they say that, you know, they don't want to learn this history lesson, seem to have a great historical recollection about the violence they've done to Black men's bodies throughout centuries.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's amazing how much they know about the particular and specific acts of violence that have been committed against Black men in particular. But these are the same people. Yeah, these are the same people who claim, well, no, look, this history is long gone and it was before my time and my family had nothing to do with it. Well, you sure know a whole lot about it.
I don't see race.
And that one.
But I know I'm gonna cut off a Black man's penis.
Right, right.
The threats that I got, I mean, honestly, some of the death threats I got were that heinous. You know, that they're gonna lynch me up from a tree and cut off my man. Like, you know, so that's what I'm saying. There's a kind of dishonesty in this country about race and racism, and there's a great dishonesty about the particular or peculiar nature of racism, or as you know, I call in my book, anti-black misandry, building off of William A. Smith's work towards black men and boys. You know, so I'm trying to expose that, but of course, those things come at great cost in our political climate.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that we opened up with that personal story of yours and what related with the white supremacists and the death threat you got, because one of the main reason that being here is to talk about the Man Not, where you cover a lot of those things and you cover a lot of what happened to you. Basically, everything you was just saying about your experiences with dealing with that particular incident, you cover so much in the Man Not, and I've just gotten the book. And a couple of other people I know have just gotten the book. And I mean, guys, if you're really interested in this type of work, I mean, to me, I mean, this book is, and I'm not just saying this because Dr. Curry's here. I'm saying I reads, and I really was impressed by this work. So we're going to get into this, and one of the things that really struck me, Dr. Curry, is the fact that when you first advertised the book, and I saw the young man that you used on the cover page, George Stinney, I believe his name is.
George Stinney.
And I mean, I remember I might have heard about his story maybe some years ago, and you know, without hearing nothing about him when I was going through school. And I remember on social media, people were passing his story around. And I said, wow, I said, this had been about maybe 4 or 5 years ago when I first heard about it. And, you know, and I said, wow. I said, I knew about Emmett Till, you know, but I never knew about George Stinney.
Right.
Never knew about him.
Right.
And when I started to read his story and read the events that led up to his life being taken, I mean, I cried, man. I did. I cried because I saw this little boy. I think he was 11 at the time or something, but this little boy who had no one to back him up, no support, the whole society, the system, the justice, everything, being part of a community that couldn't defend him. And when they related one part of the story where they said because he was so tiny, he was a child, that they had to make him sit on books.
Just to electrocute him.
Right, just to electrocute him. And so when I saw that you used his, I hate to say mugshot, his photograph on the front of the cover, I said, man, I said, he is like the poster child of what Man Not is about. That's what I said to myself. You know, when I started to read this, I said, wow, I mean, I saw a lot of me in there. You know, but when I saw this young man, I said, wow, I said, if there could be a physical symbol of Dr. Curry, what you was talking about and trying to relate to us through this book, I said, man, this kid, this young man embodied that, you know. So let me ask you this question. What led you to do this type of work?
I mean, man, it's, you know, I tell people all the time, it was actually listening to black men. I started off, and, you know, I told this story a few times. The first chapter of the book was actually chapter 4.
Wow.
Because I was interested in trying to understand why the rape of black men had been left out of history. Because I was doing research and I would constantly run across these small passages that seemed to indicate that black men were raped by white men or raped by white women. And what would end up happening is, you know, I started presenting this at conferences. And one of the first places I presented it was in 2012 or 2013 at a Philosophy Born Struggle conference. And so I read the paper, you know, I was saying, look, this is new research. We need to think about this differently. And a black feminist booed me. You know, she said I was erasing black women. And, you know, I presented the paper 2 or 3 other times. And what started happening at these conferences was that other black men would come up to me and say, you know, that happened to me. So at the time, I thought it was maybe 1 story, maybe 2 stories. And over time, it became 10 stories, 15 stories. And it really changed me. It really, because I didn't have an answer for young men confiding to me that they were victims of rape and abuse. And it really changed the whole way that I approached my interaction and study of black men. Because, you know, I went through school and I was trained like everybody else. Black men are oppressed, but they don't suffer from gender oppression.
Right.
You know, rape, domestic abuse. These things happen to women. They don't happen to men. Men are perpetrators. And, you know, I was always suspicious of it, but I didn't really question it. I just assumed, well, I mean, maybe this is just the way the world is. And when I started meeting these male victims, I started doing Google Scholars. I never forget one of the first Google Scholar searches I did a few years ago. And I couldn't find anything on black male victims of domestic abuse. And I was like, well, that can't be right because I'm meeting.
Wow.
Right? I started looking up black male victims of rape. I couldn't find anything. I said, that can't be right because I'm talking to them.
Right.
And I started, and for a little while, honestly admit, I was depressed. I cried one day because I couldn't figure it out. I didn't have an answer. So I said, okay, I was like, I'm going to create an answer. So I started developing a field and started reading all the literature that white people had done about male victims in their race, and started developing conceptual schemes and theories to talk about it and out. And the amount of pushback that I got for starting to have these conversations about black male victims in the academy, from feminists and from even other black men, was tremendous. Because the idea was that, well, you can't say that women abuse men. And I said, why not? I was like, I've interviewed people. I've talked to people where they were abused by their girlfriends, their wives. I mean, even child abuse. You know, I've talked to men who were victims of rape when they were 9 years old, 10 years old, 11 years old. And I took all that and I tried in the book, you know, that's what drives me. Like, I sat down, I wrote the book in one street. Like, I sat down and just wrote the whole book. Because I was so motivated by trying to answer the pain, trying to get an account of the pain and the death that black men suffer and communicated through their words, through their lyrics and hip hop, you know, through their videos on YouTube, that pushed me to write The Man Not. And I look at it today, I haven't read the whole book back again, actually, but I look at it today, and I think that it serves its purpose, which is to show that we need a new way to study black men and boys. That the discourses we have today about black men being hyper-masculine and black men being trash and black men, that these are examples of the dehumanization of black men, not actual scholarly analysis. And we need a black male studies that's looking at why black men are treated the same way that, say, Jewish men were treated in the Holocaust. Why black men in the United States and Bermuda and South America are treated the same way. Because we have to start understanding the relationship that racialized out-group men have to dominant whiter European patriarchy. And that's a level of analysis that I don't think most scholars want to engage upon, because it shatters so much of their identity politics that it questions the basis of many people's careers.
Now, when you refer to identity politics, because I mean, even following some of your posts, I kind of get confused in a way, because I kind of have the understanding of identity politics in the way that we use it politically,
right,
in defining black politics per se, you know, as opposed out of everything else. When you refer to identity politics and the problems that it create, what do you mean by that?
I mean that people's identity and the experiences that emanate from that identity become authoritative without any measure or empirical verification.
Okay.
And because a black woman speaks an experience, it becomes truth that I have to accept. Because a black gay person or queer person or queer person has a particular experience, it somehow becomes sociological truth without any investigation behind the sociology involved in that experience. I think that that's in the academy. When you talk about identity politics, it's not merely political representation as out in the activist front, but it's also this kind of claim to standpoint or a kind of unique epistemology or knowing of the world. And I adamantly disagree with that view, because just like the scholars of old, like Du Bois or Charles Johnson, there was always an attempt to study and verify the problems in our communities. For me, black male studies is an empirically based theorization of black male life. And that includes ideas of black fatherhood. What does it mean to be a black son? What does it mean to grow into a black man? These questions have to be answered by engaging black men and boys, by engaging black communities, by engaging black mothers. Because one of the things that I didn't expect is some of the biggest advocates for my work have been black mothers with black sons.
Wow.
Who are looking for an answer for many of the things that they're experiencing. And again, you know, this is what's difficult for me, is because in the academy, you know, it's kind of like you write a book about black men, somehow you're a men's rights activist. But you talk to black people, and they're like, this is groundbreaking because I'm trying to figure out what's going on with our boys. Why is my son disengaging? Why does my son not have any belief that he has a future? And as you know, I talk about this all in the book because I'm saying that because of the problem of death, black men and boys have an adjusted time frame on how they view life. If you're surrounded by death all the time, you don't have the kind of aspirational nature that says, oh, in 20 years, I'm going to have X. And we find this in study after study after study with black men, that especially poor black men. So how do we account for that without saying, well, those black men are broken? It's not that they're broken. They've adapted to the structural constraints of their reality. If you kill them early, then they're going to have a carefree attitude towards what they can and cannot do before they reach the point that they die, right? We expect that of any rational group of people.
Right.
With black men, it becomes pathological. Oh, well, black men don't want to marry. Well, what's their life expectancy? What's their ability to get a job? What's their mental health situation like? Right? Like, none of these questions about black men and boys are asked, but then you turn to the root, you turn to Twitter, it's all because they're pathological.
Right.
And I have a hard time believing that any black person is pathological, much less black men, especially young black boys. What I'm interested in is, well, what are the conditions? What are the circumstances? What are the material problems and obstacles in black male life that are producing these kind of effects in a whole population? And when you start asking those kinds of questions, the conversations get real thin real quick, because nobody actually knows about black men and boys. They can tell you what Bell Hooks said about black men and boys, but Bell Hooks doesn't use citations. So nobody knows any studies about black men's attitudes. They don't know any studies about the peculiar stereotypes. They don't know about black male psychology. They don't know about black male sexuality. It's all rumors. It's all stereotypes. And then when someone comes in with data and comes in with study after study and comes in with interviews that I've conducted of black male victims and other scholars, you know, some of my colleagues have conducted with young black men's sexual experiences or abuse or sexual coercion, suddenly the world has to stop, because now it makes all the gender theory that's been done on black men and boys look like it's been a charade, which it is. Wow. Nobody is serious about actually studying black men and boys. They want to talk about our music, they want to talk about our deviance, but they don't want to talk about our lives.
And all of that you just said about the data and the studies and the refusal even in academia to focus on the actual experiences of black men and boys, you're qualified to say this because you were actually hired you were hired by Texas A&M University to specifically focus on critical race theory, black male studies, and Africana philosophy. So this is, they brought you in to study this. And then when you actually did, then what happens to black people when we actually start talking about our stories and the truth and history? Yeah, that happens. And it's still happening.
No, it is. But I mean, that's, I have to laugh to myself sometimes, because this shows you, I think, what diversity actually looks like in many of these white institutions, right? That, you know, it's somebody's initiative, let's go hire a black person, or God forbid they hire a black man, and a black man says, okay, well, let's start talking about ourselves, right? Because I'm not a liberal, I'm not a progressive in that way. I come from poor black people in the South, so I write about and largely from the position of poor black people from the South. Right. You know, my grandmother used to clean white people's houses. You know, I'm a generation removed from illiteracy. You know, like, these are real problems. I'm not a northerner that's 2 or 3 generations vested in a middle class lifestyle. Right. I care about black people who suffer. And when you do that, right? Because I mean, my research talks to You know, this is what I just don't understand. I actually talk to victims. Right?
Right.
People email me on Facebook.
Right.
People email me. You know, I interview them. I speak to them. They, you know, they want to know. They want to talk about their victimization. So this isn't some disconnected project where I'm just like, just trying to refute some ideas. I'm saying that the theories we have now of black feminism, black masculinity, or sexuality do not give any account of black male victims in domestic violence, child physical abuse, or child sexual abuse. And the culmination of that is that we have all this undealt with trauma, no recognition of it, no scholarship documenting it, and then no protocols to treat it. So we keep saying that black men are toxic, black men are hypermasculine, black men are deviant, when black men are actually just victims of untreated trauma that you automatically give to the white woman, that you automatically give to black women. Nobody says that black women are pathological because they abuse their children or they kill their children. They say something had to happen, some stress, some abuse had to happen to cause that. But a black man does the exact same thing. Oh, well, it's his patriarchy. He's a sexist. He hates women. This is just silliness.
But we all,
and that's what I mean by the identity politic. You have an ideology like feminism or intersectionality that tells you men are violent. So then you say there's a black man. He's violent because he's a black man, right? It's tautological.
But
Circular argument.
you know, but it's something that we also see when you said that they make these excuses for white women and for black women, but they're also starting to make it for white men, especially with the opioid crisis.
Oh yeah, they're making it for white men.
Yeah, you're starting to see that too. And
you can't leave out white men.
Oh no, you can't leave out white men. But and what you spoke about your connection to the data, your connection to the research, and this trend of academia now being disconnected or being on the outside looking in, and you call that the new racism in the man knot. I think you referred to it as the new racism, and one, I won't drop names.
Brown's term.
Right. But one person comes to my mind, well-known scholar amongst black circles. Oh, yeah. But I won't name drop.
Let's not name drop. Let's be polite tonight.
But let's get into this, Jackie. While we do this. One of the things that was interesting to me, and I got to put on my old man glasses here, because I just thought, that don't worry, Doctor, it's gonna happen to you too. Let me see on the introduction, you said something, and it says, while the male descendants of colonizers are recognized for the naturally occurring varieties of masculinities within their group, this insistence on multiple masculinities have often been denied to black men who are the descendants of slaves. And what do you mean by that?
So when you look at the masculinity literature, and this really starts with the debate with R.W.S. Connell and was picked up later by James Messersmith up at the University of Maine, I believe, there is an insistence, an adamant demand that we understand masculinity has variations. So hegemonic masculinity is a masculinity that controls through ideology, not by force. It controls property taxes, laws, etc. Right? Subordinate masculinities are usually working class or poor white masculinities, right? Because when she started to write the book, she was really talking about Australian boys. So she was talking about, upper class and lower class, or, and it's fascinating to me because in the work, you see Messersmith and Connell saying, look, these poor working class white men are much more egalitarian and kinder to women and have more balanced gender roles than hegemonic or patriarchal men, right? And then so here's what happens. So then they take this term from the 1980s that was reformulated in like 1995, 2000. They bring it over to the United States, and they say, well, every man is hegemonic and every man is patriarchal and masculine. But that's not the schema of the theory. The whole point of having hegemonic masculinity is to show that there's hegemonic masculinities and subordinate masculinities.
Right.
And then now they're using this term to talk about black men. So they're like, black men's hegemonic masculinity. I was like, but hegemonic masculinity requires that you're part of the upper class. Black men have never been part of a middle or upper class structure in the United States as a group.
Right.
I was like, and furthermore, and this is what kills me, furthermore, white people who are the descendants of colonizers, so people who literally came to land, killed everybody, and we're talking about 2-3 generations later, are thought to be more egalitarian right, than the patriarchs that came there and killed everybody.
Oh my
When
goodness.
they're poor.
Right.
Wow.
Black men were never part of patriarchy. Were raped by patriarchs, eaten by patriarchs, and then enslaved. And then you say that the descendants of them 2 or 3 generations, right? Because we didn't just get free. We got Jim Crow, right?
Right.
The divestment of unemployment,
Right.
and Reconstruction before that. They don't have any egalitarian ideology. So poor white men hate ruling class white men and create masculinities to resist it. Black men who have literally been fighting white men and white women too, really, if you're honest about it. Through Africa and through South America and the Caribbean and America.
Right.
They want nothing more but to be white men.
Wow.
And the irony, see, this is the irony. The irony is in the United States, you have black feminists and intersectional theorists making this kind of argument. But then you have people in Australia, Europe, and Africa making the opposite argument, because they're saying that when you look at anti-colonial movements in Africa and throughout the diaspora, it's showing that black men are men of the darker races, men of the global south outside the metropole, are actually an answer to hegemonic masculinity. So outside the United States, black men are one of the greatest threats to hegemonic masculinity and white patriarchy, because they continue to try to break it down, fight it, revolt against it. In America, we just want to be patriots.
Y'all are propping it up, apparently.
Yeah. Wow.
But see, this is what I mean about theory. And the reason for that is because outside the United States, they take a Marxist and sociological lens to studying men. In the United States, we study men as an offshoot of feminist theory. So we study men based on what feminists say about men, not about our actual study of men, right? And that's a huge difference, because when you have these other scholars doing men's studies or doing masculinity studies, or even, Messerschmitt just wrote a new book on hegemonic masculinity. There's much more nuance in the studies and the data than we are led to believe when we just have these conversations of intersectionality, etc. And for black men, it's really strange, because you have overwhelming amounts of data showing that black men are not like white men at all. That their concept of masculinity is communal, is geared towards social justice, is much more familial. That black men have much more progressive attitudes on women's rights and child work, and black women's political participation. They help more in the house. They're more involved with their children. Like, black men are just completely different from every measure of masculinity. Outside of the worker, the provider role, which a lot of black men take on largely, because of Christianity and just the Protestant work ethic that we're socialized into. Black men differ on a lot of different measures than white men and white women. Like, black men are more progressive than white women on women's rights. So all this evidence exists, has been around for decades, but black men get no credit for their progressive attitudes. They get demonized more than anything. That despite the attitudinal studies, black men are still called misogynistic when they're less misogynistic than white men. It's because we use stereotypes to understand and interpret black men and boys, rather than actual data or their actual testimonies of their lived experience.
And you speak about that in your introduction, about the characterizations of the black male image. When you were talking about, if you could just briefly talk about that, because that is so important. Because when you say about stereotypes and how these stereotypes came into being, and why we as a society, instead of relying on the scholarship, which you're doing and some others are doing, we're still holding on to these characterizations of black men. Right. Even like, for example, the CDC had just backed up, Dr. Curry, what you said about black men being more involved in their children's lives than anyone else, but yet we still run, even amongst some of our audience members, who still hold on to the view that black men, and we hear this all the time from people who think they know about the black family. Well, just if the fathers were more involved. Right. Well, the fathers are involved, but they don't want to accept that.
Well, here's what's funny about that. So, I've got into arguments with people, largely, when I do podcasts, sometimes I try to respond to people in comments, just to let them know if they had a question, like, here you can read for yourself. And one of the criticisms, that never works. One of the criticisms was the CDC study. It was like, they interviewed black fathers, and black fathers were self-reporting. So these black fathers were lying, basically.
Right,
and
exactly.
It's interesting to me, because we don't do that with any other group. So when black women say, "Here's my experience" or "Here's my ex," we're like, "Oh, they're telling the truth."
Right. That's true for all black women.
Yeah, it's true for all black women. Even when you're doing like a small cohort, right? We same thing with when, you know, people report their attitudes. We generally take those things as true. With black men, we say they're liars.
Right.
So then I say, okay, let's assume you're right. Well, let's look at these smaller cohort studies, right? Like, let's look when they interview 15 people, 20 people, 30 people, right? These smaller studies. And they say the same thing. And they're like, well, black women's experience refutes that. And I was like, well, if the argument is that black women's experiences of black men determine who black men are and what they are, then what's the point of ever studying black men just as black women? And that's the biggest difference, I think, behind what I'm talking about in terms of black male studies and how we do black masculinity theory. Black masculinity theory says just believe what feminists say. We don't have to verify it. It's black women's experiences. It becomes absolutely true no matter what. And I say, well, if it's true, then let's test it.
Right.
When we go out and test it, or we go out and look for the previous literature on it, it's often not the case that it's true. And that's what I try to explain in the book. That look, when you look at the development of black masculinity theory, from Michelle Wallace to Bell Hooks to Kimberly Crenshaw to Patricia Hill Collins, and I admit Collins is better than most of them because she does believe in evidence, there's still a horrible deficit model that's being applied to black men, right? And the deficit model is that because black men lack manhood, they seek to abuse and hurt others to gain it. And that's where you get this idea that black men want to be like white men.
Right.
The problem with that is there's never been an actual study by black women. This is what gets me. There's never been a study by black feminists that document and prove that claim.
Wow.
The only evidence that has ever been written to support the claim that black men want to be like white men comes from white racial social scientists who are writing this material from the 1930s forward.
Wow.
So when they're making arguments trying to marry sociology to psychoanalysis, then you get people like Avessia Cardinier in The Mark of Oppression. You get people using Adler saying, look, I mean, this is like colonialism.
Right.
Take a superior race and put them to a childlike or dependent race. The superior race becomes the father. The inferior race becomes the child. The child tries to imitate and mimic the father. Right? That's the basic theory. If you're using Adler, it's masculine protest. The superior male makes the inferior male protest his masculinity. He tries to be like the superior male. These are the two psychoanalytic theories being utilized towards colonized people at the turn of the century. Black feminism, intersectionality merely appropriate that psychoanalytic trope.
Wow.
There's no evidence, and this is just so important. There's no evidence. There is no study that actually demonstrates that black men's masculinity seeks to imitate white men.
Right.
It is merely psychoanalytic theory that says because black men desire power, which they're denied, they seek to be like white men. The problem with that is none of that's exclusive to men. Because when you look at hegemonic masculinity, white women try to be like white men because they're at the top.
Yes.
Black women try to be like white men because they're economically viable and socially mobile. I think you can see that with Issa Rae and some of the comments she makes about marrying up and not marrying black men.
Yes.
This is how colonized societies work. The lower class are going to imitate the higher classes. And for gender theorists to suggest this only happens around a male axis overlooks all the social norms and social scientific data we have about how assimilation and socialization happen. The reason that black women have issues with beauty standards is because they've internalized some of the ideas of white beauty standards.
Right.
That's true.
Right? The same way for so long that we straighten our hair. And the same way that you have in some countries skin lightening products. These things happen. So why are we talking about internalized racism as if it's only particular and peculiar to black men? We have whole histories and evidence that shows that attitudes about beauty, economics, education, and class strata affect all black people or all oppressed people within a society.
That's
it's a sleight of hand.
Yeah. And it's been, I think, I mean that's just like that almost got me to curse. I'm working on that. But that miseducation conditioning that has been done so well through media, almost every media outlet that has ever existed, which is why we always say on this show, there's no such thing as that's just a movie or that's just a song. You can enjoy it for its entertainment value, but understand it always has a purpose that's outside of you just sitting there enjoying it. From the earliest hip hop to Black Panther, the movie, all of it. There's information in all of it. But in particular, I was struck by what you just said about the way colonization has affected all of us, and racism has affected all of us. Dr. Amos Wilson said the huge mistake that people make when they're trying to talk about the psychology of Black people, and especially Black families, is that they're using the standards by which they would measure white society and behavior, and trying to use those standards with Black people in a completely different context, social and historical context. And when I think about movies like The Color Purple,
oh God,
and the damage I have personally believed that movie did to the image and the narrative that Black people have had about Black men. I mean, when the movie came out, I think I might have been one of like 5 women, Black women on the planet, maybe, who just hated it. Because even though it was a good movie, I saw how people looked at it and said, see, this is how Black men are.
Yeah.
This is why we're still oppressed.
Yeah.
And I see that with so much more in entertainment, but I also see it in politics, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I'm wondering about one of your chapters. I see how in entertainment, American society has to have the nigger, right? And the nigger is always a Black man first, always. That reminds me of what James Baldwin says about, yes, America has to have the nigger. But you talk about specifically, let me look at it so I can get it right, the political economy of niggerdom.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I'm reminded about all that imagery from movies and hip hop, and I'm thinking about specifically Hillary Clinton and the super predator theory.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right? So you talk about the super predator mythology and the political economy of niggerizing Black men through that. But here's my question. Now, if Black people who are politically involved and leftists or whatever, if we can justifiably be outraged and appalled and insulted by Hillary Clinton and white liberals, Bill Clinton and whomever, advancing the super predator theory for their political ends, how are we missing our own misandry among Black women when we are blind to our own perpetuation of the Black male super predator theory? Because that's what I think we're doing when we come out with the Black men are the white men of Black people kind of garbage. How do we navigate that and come out of this relatively sane?
Well, I think we have to be honest here, right? I mean, the Academy has set up a system where you can't interrogate Black women's experience, much less their voices. So there's no way to interrogate. I'll give you a great example. I mean, in the 70s there were a few studies, but there's not a lot of accessible studies on how Black women view Black men. So you can find practically anything you want about Black women's attitude except that.
Wow.
There's not a lot. I mean, now Black family studies. Now, if you look at it like Black relationships, sometimes you have them doing clinical studies that talk about the conflicts and the issues between Black men and women and some of the stereotypes. But in terms of generally going out and measuring, well, how do Black women feel about Black men and boys? A lot of people don't do that. And I guess that's what I find to be so interesting is that the conversation is always one-sided. And here's what I mean. Stacey Patton does this excellent work on child abuse, and she talks to male victims, right? And one of the things that happens, they're like, look, I was beaten and abused by my mother, so this creates other issues for me, issues that I have with women, right? And that makes perfect sense. You're going to come out of any situation of abuse with some kind of trauma and some kind of behavioral effects. Black women rationalize those effects, be it trauma, be it disappointment, be it bad relationships, as universal racist stereotypes about black men. So if a black man cheats on a black woman at the age of 19, and I deal with this at the university all the time, because a lot of the sororities bring me in to talk to them about black men in relationships, right? They're like, none of the black men want is black, they don't want to settle down. I'm like, they're 19. I was like, look at the expectation. Your expectation is that where you have a sex ratio where there's one black man to basically 4 or 5 black women at a predominantly white college or university, that in the prime of black men's sexual peak, they should commit to just you.
That's not.
At 19, 20, 21.
That wasn't even happening in my day.
Okay, can I just say though, I can laugh at that at 50 because at 50 I know better, right? But at 19, I can be honest and say I was salty for a time because I believe that too. Black men just don't want to commit, and black men just don't like black women. And it took me a couple of years and living out in the world and traveling a little bit and honestly just maturing to finally get to the point where I realized, no, wait, black men are doing the same thing you doing. They're growing up, living their lives, and having experiences too. Stop taking everything so personal.
But let's talk about this dark side, Dr. Curry.
We interpret it through the stereotype.
Right.
True. Yes.
But let's talk about this dark side, because the type of work that I do, I'm around a bunch of black men all the time. In fact, Jackie, you and I had experience at my barber where a black woman came into the barbershop after they were closed. Now, this barbershop, most of the brothers, we all get along fine. Most black women and bring their children in there, everyone's respected. And on this one incident, and this is just one of many that I've been seeing lately, a black woman comes in and she leaves out, takes her son with her, comes back when the barbershop is closed.
I remember that now.
And the guy tells her, he said, ma'am, you were here, but you left, but it's closed now. We're not cutting any more hair. Why did you leave? And she just, she cusses them out.
Black men were the devil.
Right.
They were the devil that day.
But this is the thing that interests me, because I've seen this, especially with younger men. I'm 52. But I see this a lot with men under 30. I should say 30. This hostility that they're starting to have with black women. I've seen this in the barbershop where they don't confront the black woman when she was acting like she was acting. But when she left, they all looked and said, man, that's just how they do. And here I am an elder now, and I'm listening to them. And they said, man, look, what do you want to say? That's just how they do. And I've seen other young men who had similar negative experiences to the point where they won't admit it to black women. But amongst themselves, they really don't want to be bothered with them. And I'm not looking at so much as our age. But in that under 30, there seems to be a real hostility. And black men are starting to, you see it. I'm just saying that it worries me,
Well, it worries me too. It worries me too. But again, I think this is the effect of the mutual trauma that black men and women suffer. That's why I say in my work that, in chapter 3, that the issue here isn't to blame one over the other, but it's to understand the dynamics between black relationships and black families. And I'll give you a real quick example of what I mean by that. When you look at black dating couples, so when black people are just dating, black men disproportionately are victims of intimate partner victimization, right? Than any other group of men. Same thing with black women. So even when we're dating each other, not just in marriage situations, there's a high level of conflict and physical engagement between couples. And nobody knows why, right? So what I'm interested in doing, because I agree with you, I think that there is this kind of conflict and socialization within especially young black people, where we take on the pathology, and we take on the mutual hatred of each other.
Right.
And we're just like, that's just how it is. That's how black women are. That's how black men are. And we don't look at how those dysfunctions, which are exacerbated by poverty, unemployment,
right,
access to mental health resources, etc., are affecting the way that we're interpreting each other generation. Because, like I said, going back to the story with the women in college, it wasn't just that they were saying, "Oh, the man won't settle down with me." They're like, "Oh, black men don't want us. Black men want white girls."
Wow.
And you had the white women co-signing like, "Oh yeah, some black dude try to talk to me." I'm like, it don't matter if 20 black dudes try to talk to you. There's 1,000 of them here. That's not a representative sample that all black men want you.
Right.
This is what we work with. And
right.
in the academy, all you need are 2 stories. You just need an amen corner to say, "Yep, that's my experience. That's how black men are." So you overlook all the black men that are successfully married to black women. You overlook all the black men that are married and have beautiful families and children. All the black men that are raising daughters. You say black men are sexist out of the gate. But then when you look at the attitudes, like I say, you look at some of these old studies from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, they're like, well, black women have just as negative, if not more negative attitudes than black men about the opposite sex.
Right.
They think they're dogs. They think they're promiscuous. They think they're lazy. They think they're idle. They think they're stupid. And this is how teachers interact with young boys in our classroom. This is how parents interact with young boys in our homes. This is how single mothers interact with black boys in our community.
And so I think it's very important. I'm sorry. And I think I was just, when you said teachers, that's incredibly important. That is almost as important as who raises that child, because our teachers, most of the teachers in the schools that our kids go to are black women. That's why there's such a push for more black men in classrooms as administrators, because most of the teachers are women. Right. And we've all grown up, like you said, with these misconceptions, mythologies, stereotypes about innate pathologies that we have toward each other. I heard it when I was growing up. I mean, I heard it when even when I was a young adult. I can't tell you how many times I heard black women who had college degrees who were mad because they couldn't get a date on Friday night say that black men ain't shit. Right.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I mean, whenever I would, because I'm just,
now we have hashtags about that.
Exactly. And I'm just one of those kinds of people that I just gotta be contrarian. I don't know what's wrong with me, but whenever I would hear somebody say, this was around 28, 29 years old, whenever I would hear, an accomplished black woman say, black men ain't shit, I would always look at her and say, well, maybe it's not that they ain't shit. Maybe you're just a shitty person and nobody wants to date you. I mean,
maybe. Now, one other thing, because I got to get back in this book.
I know. We
on page 21, Old Man Glasses again.
Old Man Glasses.
All right. This is one thing that really took to me, Dr. Curran. It says, black males are socialized to understand manhood in the context of their vulnerability. The dangers their assertiveness and competitiveness are perceived to have in the larger society. Black men define manhood based not on their ability to dominate others, but rather on their vulnerability to America's racist, misandrous regimes. Please explain that to us, please.
So what I was saying there, and I was largely drawn for some of the work of Clyde Franklin back in the mid-'80s, was that black men are not rewarded for typical masculine traits, right? Like, I mean, even if you think politically, black leaders get shot. When you think about the smart black boy, he's either called effeminate or arrogant or conceited. Like I was, like throughout school, I was academically high achieving. I can't tell you how many times I was called white.
Oh, you too, huh? You too, huh?
Yeah, man. I mean, because with my build, I used to lift a lot. And, with my build, they were like, oh, you should be playing football. You shouldn't be the captain of the debate team, right?
Wow.
So there's not a lot of incentives that black men have to be high academic achievers, right? Both socially and sometimes culturally. So what you end up with is this kind of schism where black men lessen themselves. We shrink ourselves. My wife tells me sometimes, you got to be on 75 because 100's too scary for people. And we do that to cope with the reality that if we show that we're more intelligent than a black woman, or we show that we're more intelligent specifically around white people, then that comes off as arrogant and threatening. And what I was trying to convey there is that black men know their vulnerability. They know that if we step out of place, if we speak too loudly, if we take up too much room, we're going to be sanctioned.
Wow.
Either somebody will call the cops on us, they'll accuse us of something, or they'll demonize us. And we deal with this in the workforce constantly, right? That anytime a black man is in the workforce, I mean, Robert Livingston does great work on this. He calls it the teddy bear effect. He looks at CEOs, and he says, listen, if a CEO comes in and knows more than any other group, black women, white men, they're penalized. It's automatically seen as aggressive disinviting.
Right.
When we look at all the research from Navarrete and all these people that are looking at formidability studies, like even black men who are 5'2" appear to be taller, stronger, faster, and more aggressive. This is how the world sees us. So you can't tell me that all the coping strategies that I know black men have, because I have them too, right? So we try to make people feel that they're not afraid of us, is the same thing as patriarchy.
Right.
It's the same thing as a white masculine identity, where white men are mediocre at most things they do and pretend that they're stellar. Because black men are constantly lessening their achievements to not make other people uncomfortable. And I'll tell you, even in the academy, given how well published I am and the types of awards and things that I've won, I can't, speaking, white people and even some black people view everything I say as either aggressive or arrogant.
Wow.
So even as a full professor, even, with a book, that sold thousands of copies, none of it's taken as authority. It's taken as aggressive, abrasive, or arrogance. And this isn't, and, it's not unique to me, because we have tons of studies that show that this happens to practically every high-achieving black male in society. The problem is nobody wants to acknowledge that's how we perceive black men. So it's not that we don't have evidence to that. The issue is nobody wants to interpret what happens to black men. And I'm certainly not the only one. They don't want to interpret what's happening to black men in the academy, in these executive positions, in these high-profile, white-collar jobs, as a kind of gender-specific racism. And that's what I mean when I talk about misandry. A lot of people try to misconstrue misandry as a men's rights term because they want to say, oh, misandry doesn't exist. But when you're talking about racialized men, black men, brown men, indigenous men, misandry obviously exists.
Right.
Because the kinds of violence that we've inflicted on them, you can't cut off a woman's penis. You haven't historically called black women, indigenous women, and brown women rapists.
Right.
You didn't develop perils. You didn't develop the black peril, the brown peril, the yellow peril at the turn of the century because of women. You did it because of men. So if you have specific articulations and scientized accounts of how racialized masculinity and maleness is savage and brutal and rapist and antisocial and phobic inspiring, then to study that, you need a specific account of that kind of violence and perception, which is what I call anti-black misandry. Again, this builds off of some of the work that William A. Smith did with black misandry, because he spoke about it in relationship to the internalized stereotypes, or the stereotypes that were used to talk about black men on predominantly white colleges, college and university campuses. So there's a wealth of evidence that's been historically called like gendered racism, or sexual racism, or even or misandry that's been applied to racialized men that people simply don't want to accept, right? And I think that is such a problem because it's really a deflection of the research. And when people say, well, misandry doesn't exist or it's like reverse racism, it's really a deflection of how you understand the position that racialized men, especially black men, have had in the larger white patriarchal society. Because you're not talking about men that has access to jobs.
Right.
In the 1980s, black men were called feminine by white sociologists, right? I mean, I'm constantly giving this lecture about the term of hypermasculinity. Hypermasculinity does not indicate black men being more masculine. It is a female personality disorder that emerges when a black man tries to imitate a female, the woman in a female-led household. And because he cannot imitate femininity sufficiently, he rejects femininity, becomes more deviant, and then overemphasizes masculinity as a response.
Wow.
So when you give these kinds of terms, which have these very long racist histories, as the defining terms and ideologies of black men, mind you, none of these terms come from black sociologists or black psychologists.
Wow.
They all come from white people. And you use that to frame black men's behavior, then you're ultimately saying that the kinds of misandry, the the kinds of race-specific stereotypes about black men from the 1860s forward are ultimately correct. Because there's nothing that we say today regarding black men are trash, regarding black men are violent, regarding black men aren't good fathers, regarding black men are rapists, that wasn't said by racist white feminists in the 1860s. And for the last century, and I'll make, this is, the way that we look at the claims of gender theory today are no different than the claims that white racists have made about black men for 100 years.
Right.
Wow.
So if we're calling it black gender theory or black masculinity or intersectionality, why is it then just confirming rather than refuting the racism that white social scientists held about black men? Because I mean, I was reading. There was a guy, a young professor that actually posted a quote from Bell Hooks on my page. You may have saw it, where she's talking about since slavery, black men were taught not to be good fathers and to actually, birth children they had no intent of raising. Right? She wrote. Bell Hooks wrote that in 2004. The literature on black men and social fathering has been around since the 1970s. That black men have been, integrally involved in black families, black communities, etc. Right. So why do these stereotypes persist under feminist or gender theory and language? And that's what this is what I ask in my book. How is it that you can look at a situation like domestic abuse, you can see that black women abuse black men more in these same communities. You can see that black women abuse black children more in these communities. You can see black men abuse black women more in these communities. And the issue you say is toxic masculinity and patriarchy. When you got all these other groups that are doing the same thing.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
The only reason this stuff makes sense is because you're racially profiling black men. You only care about their behaviors and violence. You excuse everyone else's, so it makes it look like they're the only ones in the black community that commit violence. You don't look at the ecology. You don't look at the cycles and circumstances that affect all black people because you're so interested in demonizing and only giving an account of black males. And the effect of this becomes what we see in social media. Black men is cis, and this was what crazy. They'll say like cis heterosexual black men are the most violent, or kill the revolution, etc. But when you compare black same-sex couples to black heterosexual couples, the rates of violence are higher. Right? It's literally racially profiling just one group. And the reason it's higher is because of different things, right? You live in the same community, but you have the added issue of stigma, societal repression, internalized homophobia, right? So the dynamic's different. Right? But somehow we can accept that. If somebody says, oh, well, same-sex couples are more violent, oh, it's because of the stigmas of homophobia and the pressures they deal with in society.
All of a sudden, data matters.
Data matters.
Data matters then. Right? Attitudinal studies, clinical studies matter. And then when you talk about black men, and you say, well, how has the unemployment and incarceration and the unaddressed sexual coercion and early sexual debut affected their relationship to women and children? They say it doesn't matter, it's all patriarchy.
And they're all trash.
And they're all trash, right? And so we weaponize, because the theory that black men abuse because of patriarchy that's Ellen Pence's and Michael Pyamar's theory, right? It's a white theory. It was tested on 9 people, no black men even in the study. And we use that, even though it's been refuted time and time again. Even though Ellen Pence says, look, we made it up. We got jingles from us interpreting or misinterpreting what people were saying, in the circles. What women victims were saying, white women victims were saying. None of that impresses anybody. Nobody says, wow, let's think of a black theory that gives a unique understanding and contribution to how black people experience domestic violence. No, we take white theories because we can weaponize that against black men because black men don't have the resources that white men have in the academy to actually go out and study themselves. White men have been refuting that theory since the 1970s. Black people are using and theorizing, writing gender theory based on a theory that most white clinicians just flat out rejected.
Wow.
So how do we explain that? Like, there's not a study, because I read this stuff out. There's not a study in the clinical literature. Now, you find it in the advocacy literature, right? So if you're reading like in women in gender studies or women who are scholars who are interviewing women in shelters, you'll find the Duluth model used all the time there. But if you're talking about people who are doing like clinical work, if you're talking about Linda Mills, right? Or if you're talking about any, Dutton or any of the people that are actually studying victims or batterers, that's not the dominant study. Most of the work now is on ecology and the difference between situational violence and intimate terrorism, and whether or not there are men in intimate terrorism, like Denise Hines' work. Like, white people are studying themselves on all kinds of measures. What's the relationship of whipping your child? What is the cause? What is the effect of child abuse? Right. That's what white people are doing.
Right.
So here's all the things that make us violent. Okay.
Right.
We need to solve and stop that.
And black people are like, it's a penis. That's it. You're violent.
Right.
Exactly.
Well.
Exactly. So that's what upsets me. We use outdated white theory against our own people when the white theories weren't even based on black people.
Wow.
Wow.
That's it.
And here's the kicker. Then we tell black, so I come in and I start saying, like, look at all this evidence, look at all this clinical data,
right.
Look at all the people that, you know, I'm interviewing, right? And they're like, well, you're just a misogynist because you're questioning feminist theory. But I'm like, your feminist theory is being rejected even by other feminists who work in the area specifically.
Right.
And they're like, well, that doesn't matter. You see, so what we've done is we've created a censorship. We've created this self-imposed morality on why you can't actually study black men and boys. And that's what's generating my interest and my passion for creating black male studies, is that we have real victims out here. We have people that deserve to be studied with the kind of rigor that we study every other group of people, including black people. And if people want to frame that as separatist or misogynistic, etc., so be it. Because their books are not trying to save people's lives. Their books are trying to actually criminalize people. When I'm saying, let's look at why black men interact this way. Let's look at why black women are abusing male children this way. Let's look at how poverty conditions us to accept these forms of violence and trauma. They don't want to talk about that. They want to pull out bell hooks and say, well, bell hooks said X. Well, bell hooks doesn't have any citations. Bell hooks is not studying and interviewing male victims.
Right.
Bell hooks refuses to admit that male victims exist in this way. So we can't keep forming our opinions based on the reiteration of white pathologies just spoken from black people, both men and women. We have to push theory forward. We have to push our knowledge forward. And the only way we're going to do that is we're open enough to ask questions about groups of people that we don't really believe are here. And for me, that's black men and boys.
Wow, that's a mouthful. We're coming to the end of this interview, Jackie. I'm going to let you have the last one.
You always do that. And then you know how I can't stop myself from talking. So, tell us quickly, or not quickly, however you want to tell us about Killing Boogeyman. You sent this to me right before, and right before we did the interview, and I made the mistake of opening it and read like the first paragraph, and I'm just like, okay, you need to hurry up and get this done. So we can now have this to talk about. Tell us about Killing Boogeyman, please. Killing Boogeymen, rather. Sorry about that.
Boogeymen, yeah. This is what's funny. That I actually got that title from Ishmael Reed.
Oh wow.
He was nice enough. He was nice enough to do a blurb on the back of my book. And I never met the guy. I have no connection to Ishmael Reed. He's an intellectual giant. But in one of the full emails or reviews that he wrote about the book, he said that America had made a business of black men as boogeymen. And that really stuck with me, as I've been thinking about the next stage of black male studies, our man not paradigm, because I was so interested in what created, or where do we get this idea of black men as boogeymen, as these kind of antisocial and fearful inspired beings from? Because there's other research, that talks about the cultural politics of black masculinity, and they document these stereotypes. But I'm not interested in documenting. I want to know what's generated.
Right.
So that piece is a historical account of all the stereotypes and all the kinds of representations in theory of black men as these negations of humanity.
Oh wow.
And what I end with is showing that none of the things we say about black men are true. So even the idea that black men are the number one killers of black women, right? I actually, as I do in the book in chapter 3, I was like, look, this is false. Well, let's look at the numbers, right? Let's look at the numbers. So there's, at the time, there were 12.1 adult black men in the country. And of that, if we're looking at single offenders, there were like 191 killers of women and children, right? And I think that year there was 100, I always forget because I always do the numbers side by side, but there was like 105, between 105 and 120 black women that killed black men. And I was like, so let's put this in perspective. That's less than 1 millionth of the adult population of black men in this country. Less than 1 million. So what we've done with theory is we said the 1 millionth of a percentile represents the potential of the whole group.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And I ask in the paper, who else do we do that to? Because when you look at black relationships, every black relationship is disproportionately violent to the next. So black men are disproportionately violent to black women compared to whites. Black women are disproportionately violent to black men compared to whites. Black women are more violent to black children. Black men are more violent to black children. Black children are more violent to black parents. Like in every intimate relation we have, we're disproportionately more violent than practically, than the white group. So my question was, but why do we not theorize any other group this way?
Right.
So for example, like if you think about Patricia Hill Collins' book on black feminist thought, that book comes out in 1989. And here's the kicker. So she talks about black women's unique experiences being poor and being dedicated to the community. So Marxism and Afrocentrism kind of formulate black women's standpoint here. But during the same period of time, from 1976 to 1992, black women had the largest numbers of killing their husbands and astronomical rates of intimate partner homicide.
Wow.
But we didn't, and the data set, this is the funny thing, the data set that Kimberly Crenshaw uses in her article mapping the margins literally shows that. So she cited a data set that shows the opposite of what she's claiming, right? It shows that black women are disproportionately affected by intimate partner homicide, because they are. It also shows that black men are too, and she doesn't even touch that piece.
Wow.
So then I asked myself the question. So when we look at poor black men, we don't say poor black men have a unique experience of oppression and poverty that lets them see these cool, these intersections and these different dynamics of liberation.
Yeah.
We say poor black men are violent.
Right.
And then what do we use what do we point to? Look at their rates of intimate partner violence. Look at their rates of child abuse. Look at their rates of homicide. Look at their rates of incarceration. So we use the stereotypes to define how we theorize black men. You look at the same rates of black women; they're not as high as black men, but they're certainly more disproportionate to white women or the mainstream society. But we don't use any of those to theorize black women. We're not theorizing black women as killers of children. We're not theorizing black women as violent. So what is it about their humanity that resists that generalization that black men do not have? I'm not saying that we should theorize black women that way, because I don't think you theorize the minority. You use the minority to theorize the majority.
Exactly.
What I'm saying is to stark difference, given the disproportionate violence that exists throughout our community.
Right.
Wow.
There's something about why we've tracked violence to poor black men and use poor black men who commit homicide, crime, robbery, etc. as the template and blueprint for how we study black masculinity. We refuse to do that practice for any other group.
That's true.
Killing Boogeymen is about that process. What is it about the assumptions of black maleness that allow us to use stereotypes and violence, really a class dynamic that exists amongst poor, deprived, and victimized black men as the indicator of the overall personality of black men generally in society?
Wow. Well, Dr. Curry, we thank you for spending this evening with us.
We really do.
How can folks out there get in touch with you, and what you got coming, and what you got going on in your life coming up?
We're gonna have a series of Black Male Studies launching soon.
All right.
So I hope to announce that within the next few months. I'm very, very excited about that, and I'm working on the sequel to The Man Not, called The Mismeasures of Man. Where I'm actually I'm going through the ethnological literature, and I'm showing that white feminists used black men's experiences of racial oppression and anti-black misandry as their basis for inventing woman as a minority category.
Wow.
So what I find to be interesting is, given the research that I've done, is that it shows that while we say that black men are in fact patriarchs or aspire to be patriarchs, white women use their notions of how patriarchal violence works based on the experiences of black men.
Oh my gosh.
So what I'm really trying to show is that these concepts that we have of gender, as I've indicated in the first chapter of my book, really are racial, right? So because there is no patriarchy outside of the white race in the 19th century.
Right.
So the only way that you could come up with someone outside of patriarchy is to start looking at black people, because they were a savage race. And since white women describe themselves as patriarchs, and you can see this in the suffrage literature, that they describe themselves as complementing the masculine element of civilization. The only way they could invent a concept,
but they still doing that.
Patriarchal,
right?
Is to steal it from black people, specifically black men.
You know, it's funny.
That's what's coming in the future.
You know, it's funny when you say that about the suffrage, and I just had to make this point. Now it doesn't surprise me why so many white women voted for Trump.
Nope.
Why so many of them,
Never
say
surprised.
that. Why so many white women back up these Republican, you know. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But anyway, here's the book. Where's the camera at?
Yep.
Here's the book. This is the Man Knot. And right here, just briefly, while we are on here, the cover picture of George Stinney. Real photograph for those of you out there who don't know what this photograph is. But this was the youngest person ever put to death in this country, I believe.
That's right.
Accused of rape. Right, accused of rape.
Falsely
accused of rape. And the youngest person executed. I think what really touches me is if you look at this picture and you see the face, this resignation that I see in so many of us black males, especially younger black males, this resignation of, I could say like we were talking about earlier about black men and the deaf culture, and you can see in the face this resignation to like it's no hope there. There's no tomorrow. Yeah. And so I don't know, that picture when I see it, that and the Emmett Till picture, always move me. But Dr. Curry, we thank you. Please pick up the Man Knot, and how can folks get in touch with you?
They can email me at my academic account, tjcurry@tamu.edu, or they could reach out to me on Twitter at drtjc.
All right, you got it. Jackie, take us home.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight on Live in Coffee, Current Events and Politics in Luqman Nation. We will be making a link to Killing Boogeymen available. Can we make that available? Can we publish that? Can we share that?
Sure.
Okay, we're going to make that available. Yeah. It's not a short read, y'all.
Yeah, please, yeah.
It's not a short read. It's scholarly, it's academic, but it is fascinating. Take some time out of your day to sit down and read it, absorb it, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Share this video with your friends. Have these conversations. Black women, y'all, we're not going to get free without our men. We're not. We're just not. So we cannot continue to throw them under the bus. So thanks a lot for joining us, you all. Thank you again, Dr. Curry, for joining us, and we would love to have you on again when you have time.
Yep, sure will. And if you're up in D.C., come around, man, and have some good dinner with us, man.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
All right. So
everybody, thanks so much. Peace and